Good morning, it's 1 minute past 9. I'm Nicky Campbell. It's your call. Your reaction to the Mark Duggan inquest. The jury concluded Mark Duggan was lawfully killed by firearm officers, but he was not holding a gun when he was shot. They unanimously thought he did have a gun prior to his being shot. The Met Police Commissioner, Sir Bernard Hogan-Howe, has welcomed the verdict and said his officers believed they were facing an armed criminal who posed a threat to them and the public. But the Duggan family are deeply upset. Their lawyer is Marcia Willis-Stewart.
The issue is an unarmed man was shot dead. This is the United Kingdom. We don't yet shoot unarmed people on the street. That's not what we do. That we still have a justice system that actually says when people do things, arrest them, charge them, put them through the courts.
Mark Duggan's aunt, Carol Duggan, says in her words her nephew was executed, but the former tactical advisor to the Met's firearms unit, Roger Gray, does not accept those words.
I can understand the passion, but they disgust me. I know what my former colleagues are like, and that terminology just simply does not apply. We're talking about a very last resort reaction here. The definition is when a man is armed or otherwise so dangerous, and this is what the officer believed, that he was armed or otherwise so dangerous and there was an imminent threat. That's why he reacted in the way he did.
What's your reaction? 0500 909 693 or on social media, BBC 5 Live. It's a reaction coming in, your views on it's not a verdict, it was a conclusion, your reaction to the Mark Duggan inquest. Let's get a quick call now, quick point. Nick and Stroud, what do you think?
Good morning, Nick. It seems to me that the police officers on the day, they did a really good job. No one celebrates when a guy is killed, but there's a way of giving up your weapon and giving up safely. He didn't do that, and he unfortunately paid the price. OK,
we'll come back to that point with others in a moment, but we've got this to listen to. Stay there, Nick. The former Deputy Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Sir Ian Blair, has told the Today programme that if the public understood the pressures that armed officers were under, and this really emphasises the point that you're making, Nick, people might be more sympathetic.
We need the public to understand what is happening. I mean, the best example of this was the dreadful murder of Lee Rigby, where the officers arriving, the firearms officers, were seen by the public to have to react in milliseconds to a life-threatening situation. And if we could get more people to understand that that's what happens, then maybe some of the heat, the desperate heat of these inquiries would dissipate.
Well, Clasford Sterling joins us, who is a community developer in Tottenham, works at Youth Sport and Community Activities, and Brian Paddock as well, formerly of the Met, former Deputy Assistant Commissioner. Clasford Sterling, good morning.
Good morning.
You can understand the heat, you can understand the anger. What's your view on the conclusion of the inquest?
Well, the community's outraged. I mean, it's quite obvious, and I understand what that caller just said. It's quite obvious if the evidence is put to you in that way, the police's way. He was an unarmed man. They can't get away from it. There is this grey area of how the so-called gun was 20 foot away from the car. Well, I've never known Mark to be a discus thrower or a shot put thrower.
Did you know him?
And doing it from, yes, I knew him. And to do it out of the back of a car and it get all the way to where it got seems a bit far-fetched. The only two people who's going to actually know now is Mark and the police, and Mark's gone.
So you knew him. What about the headlines this morning? The man who lived by the gun, arms draped around two violent gangsters.
The community knows, and also the police know that is an absolute load of rubbish.
What was he like?
Mark, as his mum's often described him, weren't no angel. There's a load of no angels in the community, but he was not. Mark was not the notorious Mr. Big. There's many of that even in the government. So at the end of the day, they have to now describe him to justify what they've done. He was an unarmed man. If that's how our highly trained police officers act, well, then I'm sorry if that's the sign of things to come.
Why did nobody on the jury, and this was a jury that, as David Lammy, the MP, said fairly reflected Londoners, why did nobody on the jury say this was an unlawful killing? 8 said it was a lawful killing, 2 said open conclusion, none said it was unlawful.
Yeah, why indeed? I mean, this has been the trend for many years with black people. So, you know what I mean? And also
But
maybe
there were black
the larger
people.
community.
The indication from David Lammy is that there were black people on the jury. So
Listen, David Lammy is an MP. And at the end of the day, he has to be very tactful in how he puts things over. Now, at the end of the day, I'm not an MP. I'm a member of the community. I can say how I feel, and the community can say how they feel. Now, at the end of the day, he was an unarmed man. I'm saying these highly trained police officers, and we know, yes, it's dangerous out there, but they are highly trained police officers. That's the word, highly trained. They're not your normal Bobby on the street. You understand what I'm saying? So at the end of the day, if that's what highly trained officers do, well, you might as well give us back the bad ones, because at least we know what they do.
Brian Paddock.
Good morning.
What's your reaction to that? Highly trained officers.
Well, I think what people tend to forget is these are highly trained human beings. And these officers were faced with intelligence, which the jury said that it was absolutely impeccable intelligence, that they were dealing with armed criminals. And indeed, the jury concluded that Mark Duggan, immediately before he was shot, was in possession of a gun. And as Ian Blair said on Radio 4 this morning, these officers are faced with split-second decisions where, and it appears that the jury decided that this officer who shot Mark Duggan had a justified, honest belief that he was about to be shot by Mark Duggan.
Okay, justified, honest belief. Thomas in Birmingham in the West Midlands. Hello, Thomas.
Good morning.
A justified, honest belief that he was about to be shot.
I can't think how he possibly could have drawn that conclusion. I mean, my point for ringing is that I'm in agreement with the family. I think that Mark Duggan was, not to put too strong a point on it, he was murdered. And I think
without putting too strong a point on it,
the jury, I think, their verdict or their conclusion, I believe, were clouded by what they knew of Mark Duggan's reputation. Notwithstanding the fact that he was involved in criminal activity, and he was murdered. He did not have a weapon on him when he was shot. And if a highly trained police officer cannot tell the difference between a BlackBerry phone and a firearm, then quite frankly, not to be too facetious, he needs to go to Specsavers.
Okay, a BlackBerry phone and a firearm. Brian Paddock.
Well, it's very easy for us who have just seen the newspaper reports. We've heard the reaction of the family. But these jurors have sat through the whole inquest. They've actually listened to not only to the police officers but other witnesses or another witness who actually saw what happened. They've carefully considered all the evidence, and although it's almost counterintuitive for a jury to say, no, we don't believe Mark Duggan had a gun in his hand, or I think it was 9-1 believing that he didn't have a gun in his hand.
9-1, yes.
And yet they say it was a lawful killing. Now, that even to me, that sounds counterintuitive, but you know, they were the ones who sat through all the evidence. They actually listened to the officer who shot Mark Duggan, and they believed him when he said he thought Mark Duggan was about to shoot him. Now,
is it possible?
About to shoot him.
Sorry?
So he didn't actually point the gun at him then?
Well, as I say, I didn't sit through the inquest. The jury did, and the jury, for whatever reason, decided that the officer was justified in shooting Mark Duggan.
And that is the law. You are justified in shooting somebody who is unarmed if you feel that that is necessary in the situation and your life is under threat and the lives of others are under threat. That is, in fact, the law. What is it possible to mistake a BlackBerry for a firearm, Brian Paddock?
Well, clearly it depends what distance you are looking from. It depends on whether you've got a clear view of the hand that you think that the weapon or the whatever is in. The intelligence the officer had was this was somebody who was an armed criminal, and the intelligence was that this armed criminal had a gun. And the officer acted on that basis. Now, whether he had a clear view of the hand...
If that intelligence had been different, though, he would have acted in another way. So I suppose the family, they're disputing the intelligence, aren't they?
Yes, but interestingly enough, the jury unanimously decided that the intelligence could not be improved upon, that the intelligence was absolutely cast iron, and therefore the intelligence that the officer was acting on...
So let's blame the jury. Okay.
No, I'm not...
For a blunder that it is...
Well, hang on. When you say blame the jury, what do you mean? Because let me just remind people as well, to the question, did Mr. Duggan have the gun with him in the taxi immediately before the stop? 10, all of the jury unanimously, Classford said yes, he did have the gun with him. Do you believe, Classford Sterling, that he had a gun with him?
No. That was the base of the evidence put to the police. The gun apparently ended up 20 foot away from the car.
There was no gun. Or you think the gun was planted by the police?
Many things have happened in the community.
Where did the gun come from?
Oh, that's a good question. That is a very good question. Now, what I'm saying is you try sitting in the back of a car and throwing even your phone out the window and let it go 20 feet and see if it's easy to do. Without anybody behind you who was supposed to be surveilling him seeing it.
Can I just answer the question about where the gun came from? Because my understanding is that there's been at least one criminal trial where somebody's been found guilty of supplying the gun to Mark Duggan.
Yeah, acquitted first and then brought back to court. Yeah, I understand that. But, you know, your intelligence, if you really wanted to get the gun off the street, if your intelligence led you to the home where he's supposed to have got the gun from, then you could have killed two birds with one stone and got them both there.
So you are absolutely sure, you have 100% faith in the fact that he did not at any stage have a gun on that day?
No, well, as far as I'm concerned, Mark wasn't like that in the community. As I said, like many young kids, he gets himself in problems, this, that, and that, but he was not that type of person, and the police very well knows that.
Did you know that he would have ever handled a gun or had a gun, just out of interest?
Well, listen, at the end of the day, I'm not with him every day of his life. So that part of it, I couldn't put a man on my heart and swear it, but that's not how he's known in the community. My facts here are the so-called everybody keeps on using this word highly trained. Yeah. Now, if that's the effects of a highly trained officer, well, then we're all in trouble. Then we're all in trouble,
Nicky. I think
because he never had a gun on him. Now, unless you're advancing to somebody and threatening somebody's life, and that hasn't come out that Mark turned around and was going at the police or something like that. I mean, I don't understand how you could shoot an unarmed man twice. Hello?
Nicky, it's Brian Paddock here. I think one of the important wider issues here is that we have people in the community who believe it's possible that the police acted unlawfully in these circumstances, and one of the other callers who's already been on has said that they believe that the police murdered Mark Duggan. You know, something is seriously wrong in terms of police-community relations if people, despite a completely independent jury, as you say, 8 of them deciding that Mark Duggan was killed lawfully, 2 open verdict, nobody said that he was unlawfully killed, and yet we still got people honestly believing that Mark Duggan was murdered. That really speaks volumes about the problem.
Well, unfortunately, I don't know the age you are, but listen, the police, they've got a reputation for these things. So, it's not like, the police...
That's what he's saying,
the police is squeaky clean.
Let's return to this.
Classford. I work with the police, and I know there are some very hard-working police who are trying to work at relations, but you have some very bad ones that do things like what has been done to Mark. So you need to own up to it as well. Don't try and paint this squeaky clean police force.
We will return to this in just a second. Michelle has the travel news. Stay right where you are, and we'll bring on Shalona in Birmingham, Mike in North London, and Mark in Finsbury Park. Your reaction to the conclusion of the jury at the inquest, Mark Duggan. Mike in North London, near Tottenham, I believe. Hello, Mike. Have your say.
Well, I mean, what amazes me is that the media is saying that the police have got to now go and gain the trust of the community.
Well, Brian Paddock just said that, and he's a former copper.
Well, I can't understand that, because I was around on the day of those riots where hundreds of mindless morons came down to Enfield and smashed up half of our town. My children were scared; they had to come home. I trust the police. Most of the people I know trust the police, and to say they have to gain the trust of that community that sent out hundreds and hundreds of people to smash up housing, and they actually murdered some of themselves.
What do you mean, that community?
That's interesting. You should quote the word "that community." It tells you who you are.
I'm quoting that because that's where the community came from.
Yeah, so hold on a minute. Enfield doesn't have the same morons.
Well, they probably do have, yeah. But what I'm saying is,
there you go. Then when you describe that community,
on that particular day, it was the Tottenham community that came out and smashed everything up.
Yeah, what, in Enfield?
Yeah.
I don't think so.
I do. You look at you ask around.
Same Tottenham people ended up in Manchester and Birmingham and the rest of the places. Then.
Well, Classford, what did you think of those riots?
Well, it was appalling. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, right, what ended up to be a very peaceful protest, yes, you did have one or two individuals that decided to come out and use it in different ways. But you know what? At the end of the day, there was so much frustration going on, right? And it may not be right.
What frustration? What frustration? What frustration?
Yeah? What frustration? Well, a lot of people was under pressure. That was just a spark that
What do you mean they're under pressure? Everyone's under pressure. I'm under pressure every day.
Yeah,
I'm struggling to pay my bills.
But no one is saying it was right.
I don't go out smashing shops up and carrying guns in my car, do I?
Yeah, but no one said it was you. I didn't say it was you, and I didn't say it was I. But there are some people that would seize the opportunity to go out there and cause problems.
Let's bring on Shalona.
In a perfect world.
Let's bring on Shalona in Birmingham. Hello, Shalona. And then we're also going to speak to Sean Bailey, former Conservative candidate for Hammersmith, Government Advisor on Youth Crime. Are you there, Sean?
Hello, how are you?
I'm very well. Very nice to have you within this discussion. Shalona.
Yeah.
All yours. Yes, over to you. We're listening.
I believe that there was never going to be any other decision made other than lawful killing by the majority of the jury, simply because in their nature of their job, not only do they have to rely on their training, but they have to rely on their instincts. And to suggest that he was lying in the fact that he believed he saw a gun would undermine their job. How would they move forward in terms of if there was any other incidents where you're going to say you don't believe that the police officer believed his own instincts? That's the whole nature of their job, is to follow their instincts and to have sharp thinking. So there was never going to be any other decision made based on that.
Do you believe that the police officer believed, or do you think that there was an agenda here?
A belief can't be measured. That's an internal feeling. It's within yourself. How can that be measured?
Yeah.
So we can all speculate as to whether he, did it because he wanted to do it. It's all going to be speculation. We can never decide that. All we know is the nature of his job is he has to be allowed to work off his instincts. We can never measure a belief.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think anybody is questioning that, but there was no aggressive behaviour towards the police. He came out of the thing and turned, and the officer said he thought the phone that he had in his hand he was pulling out a gun.
Was there aggressive behaviour towards the police, Brian Paddock?
Well, as I say, I don't know. I was not on the jury. The jury, having heard all the evidence from an independent witness, from the police officers, decided that the officer was justified in shooting Mark Duggan. Now, I don't know whether it was aggressive behaviour or what it was, but what we do know is that the jury unanimously believed that Mark Duggan was in possession of a gun immediately before he was shot. And therefore, presumably the jury decided that the officer believed that Mark Duggan had a gun and was about to shoot him, and that's why the officer shot him.
Sean Bailey, what do you think about this verdict and also the consequences and implications of it?
I think the first thing...
Sorry, it's not a verdict, it's a conclusion, just to be technically right. I do apologise. Go on, Sean.
I think the first thing to be said about the conclusion is it's happened. The jury have come to that conclusion with all the evidence they have. Everything other than that is pure speculation, and you believe what you believe. It's interesting to listen to people from the community. any other. They believe these things, and what's important for the police is how they deal with it. I go back to the point that Mark Duggan's death did not cause the riots. It was the way they were dealt with afterwards. It was how the police dealt with the public afterwards that sparked the riots.
But you've got a large amount of people believing that this man was murdered, this man was assassinating, contrary to the conclusion of the jury. They believe that. They believe he was a peace-loving man. Many of them do not believe and cannot conceive of the fact that he had a gun. And
my point being about that is
their inference is that this was a kind of planned murder with a planted gun. That's the inference. I mean, these are irreparable relations if they believe that.
Let's do the whole thing. There's sections of the public
nothing to do with the police and how they dealt with the local community, why the riots happened.
Hold on, we'll get to that.
All right, Sean, go on.
We'll get to that. Mindless moron.
We'll get to that.
Okay, let's get to that. Let's let Sean.
The point is this: there's certain people who are never going to believe in the police because of their activities, their history with the police, and what's gone on. There's other people who always side with the police because they have a relationship. My point is, the police are in a tough place, and what they need to do to make their job more easier for the local cop on the road to do is to be a bit more open. They could have dealt with the whole Mark Duggan thing in the beginning slightly differently, and it would have meant very different conclusions now. That's my first point. How they deal with the public, how they deal with any serious incident is very important because that's what builds a trust or not. What changes trust is time and actions. There are some police officers who do the right thing all day, every day. Their life is being made harder by this. It's up to the senior police officers to show that if an officer is done wrong, they will deal with him, and if an officer's done right, they will protect him. But currently, many parts of the public feel like the police just close ranks and protect each other. That's why people don't trust them. As for the riots are a different thing in different places. Locally, in Tottenham, people felt very aggrieved with how Mark Duggan was dealt with, how they were dealt with, how they were kept informed or not. Nationally, yes, the riots, a lot of young people I know who rioted don't even know who Mark Duggan is. I accept that people rioted for their own different reasons, but the one common thing was they were quite happy to take on the police, and that's still another thing for the police to deal with because that's about the people's relationship with the police. That is why the police have to decide how they deal with the public. And I'll say this: the
majority of the public in this country did not go out rioting.
That's completely right, and I'm happy that's the case. Why is that?
Because the majority of the people in this country are law-abiding. They respect the police and they trust the police. We don't go out and riot and smash up places when things get tough.
Well, there have been reasons in the past, very high profile. You can ask the people of Liverpool whether they trust the police, and you might get, certainly historically, a very different answer.
Because what's happened...
If you ask the majority of people in Liverpool if they trust the police, you'd get a yes. You're talking about the minority of people that are looking to cause trouble.
Well, listen, I don't think the world is not as simple as that. The world is not as simple as that, and the police have had a tough time. I accept that the police have a tough job, and I think Bernard Hogan-Howe and his bunch now have a historic opportunity to do the right thing and move it forward. And I make the point that the police moved from being a force to a service, and the thing about a service is it's open. Because this thing about video cameras, for instance, will allow the police to show people how tough their role is. But while they continue to, as far as the public concerned, close ranks, and it isn't about the black community, and it isn't just about London. If you ask people about Liverpool, if you ask people about the police taking bribes from the press, they've all got a story to tell. You had major political people in this country, his cabinet minister being fit up by the police as far as he's concerned. My point is it's everywhere, and this is a point where the police can deal with it, because there's no doubt their job is tough, but they need to change their attitude slightly if they want to make it doable.
Okay, big challenges ahead. Last question in this segment. We're going to go to the weather and the news in a second. Brian Paddock, is the Metropolitan Police still institutionally racist?
Well, institutionally racist is a very, very broad term. And if you mean that the organisation doesn't deliver its services equally to everybody, no matter what their background is, then I think you could call any institution institutionally racist. I think it's a bit of an empty question.
Well, it's a phrase that was used by Lord Macpherson, and it was key to the Lord Macpherson report, wasn't it?
The fact is, I don't think it's helpful in this circumstance. What is helpful is what Sean Bailey has said, because he's said almost exactly the same as Bernard Hogan-Howe has said last night. He said that he wants to get to a situation where officers can be more open in these circumstances. He's talking about officers wearing video cams, video recorders, armed officers, so that people can see what police officers face from a police officer's point of view. He's holding a meeting this morning with community leaders to talk to them about how the police can improve community relations with members of with people from the community who are going to be very upset and very bewildered by what has happened to Mark Duggan and the conclusion of the jury. So I don't know whether Sean Bailey's been talking to Bernard Hogan-Howe, but they seem to be saying very similar things.
Okay, well, maybe if Sean can stay with us, he can elucidate, but we have to go to the weather now, and then we'll have the news that Simon has the... Your reaction to the Mark Duggan inquest. Carl's in Bradford, Angela, not real name, Wood Green, London, Chris in Leeds, Mark in Finsbury Park, and we also have Charles Critchlow. Charles, the former president of the National Black Police Association. Morning, Charles.
Good morning.
Angela, Wood Green. Yes, your verdict on this conclusion.
Hi, good morning, Nicky.
Morning.
I'm actually quite shocked, to say the least. I cannot sort of put my head around that any verdict could actually come up with a conclusion of lawful killing. Going back to the case, Mr. Duggan was not armed. Regardless of what he might have had or what the police alleged might have had, he was an unarmed, person, and the police killed him. As far as I'm concerned, executed. I wanted to. I was speaking to your researcher just a moment ago.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the Digby killers were disabled. They weren't executed or killed. What's the actual sort of remit for the police when they actually believe that someone is armed? Just to execute them, to kill them, not disarm them, or shout and tell them to get down on? What is the actual remit?
It is legal to kill an unarmed. It's perfectly legal within the law to kill a person who is
the law needs to be changed.
Unarmed.
The law needs to be changed.
Well, hang on. To kill a person who's unarmed if they feel that there is a danger of their being shot or other people being shot. So the law has to be changed. So what about shooting the two terrorists at Woolwich? They were both shot. Or at least one of them was in the legs. No, they weren't.
Yeah.
But do you agree with their being shot?
Well, absolutely, because they had a weapon. I mean, it was all quite evident to see. They were quite, it was quite frightening to see. But they were disabled. What my point is that Mark Duggan was unarmed. Now, as far as I'm concerned, there was a witness that actually witnessed all this, was saying that he was putting his arms up. Now, it just doesn't ring true with what's going on and what's been said in the press. And as for the jury, I don't want to be blaming the jury, but they can only present that case, and I think it's more led on the police evidence, more on the other side.
So they kind of got a one-eyed view of this. So we'll get Charles on in a minute. Let me get Chris in Leeds on to respond to you, Angela. Stay right where you are. You make an important point, and you do so very powerfully. Chris in Leeds, go on, Chris.
Right. Firstly, I'd like to say I'm just sad that obviously somebody's lost a life because of this, because I think that's obviously really important. But I really would just like to support the police, because I think they do such a tough job, and they're always in harm's way without any kind of any kind of protection. And I think the news that they're going to wear cameras on the firearms officers will really help, obviously, avoid any sort of situation like this happening again. And then to finish off, I'd like to say I think the word executed that's been bandied around, I feel is an unfair and awful word. Well, it's something happened. It happened in an operation. Well, it happened in an operation. Call it what it is.
Call it what it is.
It happened in an operation. The word executed to me is...
Call it what it is.
Knelt down, arms behind your back.
Call it what you want to call it, but that, as far as I'm concerned, is an execution. Call it what it is.
If you don't carry a gun in the first place...
Don't go around the houses and trying to dress it up. It's an execution. That's exactly what it is. Call it what it is.
I'm not trying to dress anything up.
We know that the police has a good, hard job out there. We know that.
According to the law...
The police...
According to the law, it's a lawful killing. That's the fact. That's the cold fact this morning. What do you make of the fact, Charles? I will be with you. What do you make of the fact, Angela, that the jury by 10-0 concluded that Mark Duggan had a gun with him in the taxi immediately before the stop?
Nicky, the point that I'm making, I wasn't the jury, but what I'm saying is just one-sided. There wasn't a two-side, in terms of presenting their case. Well, it's very one-sided. There was no Mark Duggan. Mark Duggan was executed, as far as I'm concerned. He wasn't there.
Charles Critchlow.
It's one-sided.
Charles Critchlow.
They can only the jury can only present what they presented.
Well, there was legal
given
representation on both sides. Charles Critchlow executed.
Well, I can see why.
Call it what it is.
Ordinary people are having difficulty with what appears to be a contradictory position. Obviously, respect the conclusions, all of the conclusions that the jury come up with, but you're still left with this contradiction, and you can see why many people, particularly in the black community, because you've got to look at this in the context of a longer history of what people have felt, were a string of injustices all down the line. So it's not a straightforward thing. I mean, I'm a police officer.
Do you respect the decision of the jury?
I respect all of the judgments, but you see, when you look at the fact that they've concluded that he didn't have a gun in his hand when he was shot by the police, but then in the final analysis they conclude that he was lawfully killed. You can see why people will have a difficulty with that, and of course, there are avenues. People have talked about judicial review to examine these things, so that because it is important that people like the caller are able to feel that this is that they can have confidence in.
I don't think anyone disputes a word of what you say. Of course, people can understand the anger, and people can understand Chris's position as well. If we work hard, we can understand both positions. Carl in Bradford. Angela's still there. Carl, what's your position?
My position is, I think Charles has just nailed it really by highlighting the fact that this Mark Duggan incident hasn't happened in a vacuum. There's been 30 odd years of similar injustices, and people just haven't had a kind of fair outcome in terms of rights and responsibilities for them as citizens. And my concern is that even the way that the outcome of the court case is even being discussed on the news last night and on your program today, that it reflects the society that many black people live in, where those who are presenting the information, including yourself, Nikki, your producers and others, you all have your own opinions and personal views and your own stereotypes of people maybe not like yourself. You see,
absolutely.
So,
I agree.
My view is
this is why it's so important to hear from you and Angela and people.
Until we are honest, until we are truly open and honest about the cancer of prejudice and inhuman rights that affect many people in this country, we're never going to get a fair.
Okay. Carl. Wait, Angela, Carl, wait. I'm going Carl and Angela, I'm going to give you 2 minutes, both of you, now, to be open and honest about the cancer in our society. Say honestly from the heart what you want to say. Angela first.
Thanks, Nicky, for giving me the opportunity. What I'm saying is that
say anything you want.
There's an awful lot of media and press coverage in a very negative light about Mark Duggan. I'm not saying he's an angel and everything else. I'm putting that apart. My real problem and my concern is like that. You've got this law, I think is very, very prejudicial as far as I'm concerned, to one sector of the society that they can actually use as and when they want to use it. And I'm very, 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 very... I mean, it should actually have shockwaves amongst everybody, especially parents that have got children under the age of 25. And they can... So the police or the armed police forces can turn around and say, well, we have reason to believe we were we were in danger and he had an arm or she had an arm gun and what have you, we can shoot or execute that person. Is that what we're saying? Is that what's going to be allowed to happen? The second time, third time. How many more black men are going to be killed by the police force, the armed police force? How many?
I'm not going.
And then they let off. I'm not going on by the jury because as far as I'm concerned with the jury, I have absolute respect for the jury because they can only present the case what's actually been given to them. And as far as I'm concerned, it's very one-sided. Mark Duggan's dead, so where's his side? He's dead. He was shot dead. He was executed, Nikki.
All right, that's what you believe. I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to.
What it is. I'm calling it what it is.
You've said that. You've said that.
You're part of the BBC and what have you.
Well, I've let you say it. You've come on and you've said it. This is what this is all about.
He was executed.
You've said it several times.
Is an executed, and they're using this law.
You've said it.
Says that if it's, they're just using this law.
You've come on and you've said it, and that's fine. You've said it because that's what this is all about. Carl, what do you want to say, Carl?
I would say...
And say what you... speak from the heart here about what you believe is...
That's fine, Nikki. I'll speak from the heart, and thank God that Angela has also been very clear, and her passion shouldn't be, kind of interpreted as somebody who's just, over-emotional.
No, we heard her. We heard her heart.
I know, and I'm going to give you my point. My point is this. What I would like to see is, when we are talking about issues generally... that affect everyone in society, then we seem to approach it in a very pragmatic, objective way, and, everyone seems to be able to, see very clearly, how to get to the root of the issue and provide symptoms and strategies for that issue. When we're talking about issues that affect minority communities, for example, specialist issues, for example, with the black community, and, unfortunately, after... since 48, when that first Empire Windrush ship came to this country, bringing migrants that were invited by law, and the 1948 Commonwealth Act. Even today, in 2014, the fact is that this country still doesn't feel comfortable with sections of the black community that are just trying to get on with their everyday life. Well, my view is that if we were to look objectively and pragmatically over the last 20 or 30 and 40 years, how many unexplained deaths are being caused, to black people in the black community in prison.
All right, listen. We must move it on. We've got other people to listen to.
You asked me to finish up, and I'm finishing my point.
Okay, go on.
Right? Which is, look how many of those deaths have happened unexplained, and compare that. So generally, if that was the case for the wider community and how many had been, explained, it isn't fair, Nicky, and to try and convince people to accept something that isn't fair isn't helping to find a solution to these issues. It's as simple as that.
Thank you both very much. It's 9:50.
This is 5 Live Breakfast. Your call.
Right, we've just been sent a text. Let's read that from Dave in Uxbridge. And Dave says we should reflect the fact that, Dave says Mark Duggan was in possession of a gun. Guns are illegal. The only reason you would have one illegally is the intent to use it and therefore commit murder. Mark Duggan was therefore a potential murderer, and by not complying immediately and completely with police instructions, he ran the risk of the police rightfully using lethal force to prevent a potential murder. This is not the USA. No right to bear arms. The ruling is correct. Peter in Cramlington and Greg in Lincolnshire and Martin in Birmingham.
Yeah.
Martin, go on.
I'd just like to say that the only people who should be apologising today are the black community. The facts are that a mixed-race jury have overwhelmingly vindicated the police's actions. None of them, after hearing 3 months of evidence, have come to the view, contrary to the victimhood approach of Angela, that he was executed. And I was in Birmingham on both nights of the riots, in the city centre, and I went out on both nights, and I wanted to see the composition of the people who were rioting, and the majority of them were black. And I actually went out deliberately because I wanted to know what was going on and who was rioting.
Well, that could be socio-economic. It's
why weren't the Chinese out then?
Well, perhaps.
Why weren't Hindu Asians out in proportionate numbers?
Mark in Finsbury Park, do you want to come in here?
Yes, Mickey. I've been waiting a very long time.
I'm sorry for that.
But, look, the thing is, the riots are another issue which I'm not saying they should be ignored, but the point is, we're talking about police killing members of the public. Mark Duggan, I'm sure, was not an innocent man in the sense that he was a criminal. But at the end of the day, the point that I originally phoned up to make was that there's no need for the police to shoot to kill. And I think that is an issue that needs to be addressed. Best part of 1,000 people have died in the last 20-odd years. in contact with the police, and I think that's an outrageous figure. That we don't ever seem to hear about the police being committed for manslaughter when they do shoot these people. Obviously, some of them are criminals. Some of them have got guns. Sometimes they're firing, but a lot of the time they're not. And they shouldn't be allowed to just shoot people in cold blood. If they want to kill these people, why don't they come out and say it? Why don't they come out and say they wanted to kill Mark Duggan, they wanted to take him out? Fine. At least then we'd know where we stood. They'd be honest. But all this illusion about a jury and all this other stuff, I'm sorry, it's like that jury has been got at just to...
How's the jury being got at?
A convenient verdict that
how is that jury being nobbled?
How do you know it hasn't been nobbled? Sorry, how do you know it hasn't been nobbled?
Well, on that basis...
And what about all the other times? What about all the other police? What about all the other people who have been shot?
It is. Can I just say at this point, it's an outrageous allegation to say a jury has been nobbled, and a potentially dangerous one. I'm just warning you, my friend. I'm warning you, my friend. It's a potentially dangerous one. David Lammy, the MP for Tottenham, made the point, and he was very quick to make the point. He emphasised it, that it was a jury that looked very much like London. Now, if you're saying, as Angela said previously, and she was well within her rights to do so within the parameters of this debate, if you're saying that you do not feel that the proper evidence and the proper context of the evidence was presented to the jury, that's one thing. To say the jury is nobbled is quite another. Peter's in Cramlington. Hello, Peter.
Hello, Nicky. I'm amazed about this. I can't understand which part of violent, wanted criminal marks this guy out to be the next pope. He was the 48th most wanted criminal in Europe.
According to
I think the police have done us a favour.
One assessment, but you know that was on their intelligence. But in that situation, you'd have done in the situation of that marksman, you'd have done the same thing.
Definitely. If I thought he had a gun and he was going to use it, I would have shot him. And not like the previous caller said, shoot to kill policy. What did you expect the police to do? Shoot him in the big toe so he limps away?
Charles, come on.
Yeah, I think on the point about the jury, it's perfectly legitimate to respect the various different conclusions that the jury came up with, but actually to see the contradiction that the public or some sections of the community are highlighting. Now, I think what needs to happen is that I think police-community relations needs to take a much higher profile within government and within the police leadership. I think that's what causes the problem many times, is that people, certainly the black community, which you've heard in the program, seem to feel a kind of a pent-up anger. And a lot of it is historical, and I think that many of the avenues that the community had, to certainly post-Lawrence, to bring these issues on the table and have them discussed at the very, very highest level. Many of those avenues have closed off. So
but for that reason, they've been frustrated. I completely understand what you're saying. Greg in Lincolnshire, sorry to have kept you.
Yeah, right. Everybody's missing the point. The point is, and no one can argue, the man had a gun at one stage. But when he stepped out that taxi, he no longer had it. I'm not saying who, but I was in the forces. In Northern Ireland, I had a well-known politician who is now, but at the time, he was a terrorist. In my sight, I could not kill him because he wasn't pointing a gun at me. The Lord stated to the army that you can only kill if he is going to kill you. He was not having the gun, so that's where the problem lies. Is forget the fact that he had the gun. We all know he had a gun in a taxi, but the second he got rid of that gun, then there is no way they were allowed to shoot him, and that is where they've got to start doing things.
We're going to end with a text. Yeah. Thanks, Greg. Thank you. I'm a female firearms officer. I can't believe that people truly believe the officer shot him on purpose, knowing what you would go through afterwards. Suspended, family problems, court cases, etc. No firearm officer in their right mind would shoot somebody because they could. I would doubt the officer had heard of Mark Duggan until about an hour before the operation, and to think he would go and randomly murder him is just unthinkable. And of course, we need to counter the caller who said that the black community should apologise. That was an appalling generalisation. Strong feelings and strong words this morning, understandably. Thank you for listening. Stronger point on it.
The jury, I think, their verdict or their conclusion, I believe, were clouded by what they knew of Mark Duggan's reputation, notwithstanding the fact that he was involved in criminal activity and he was murdered. He did not have a weapon on him when he was shot, and if a highly trained police officer cannot tell the difference between a BlackBerry phone and a firearm, then quite frankly, not to be too facetious, he needs to go to Specsavers.
Okay, a BlackBerry phone and a firearm. Brian Paddock.
Well, it's very easy for us who have just seen the newspaper reports. We've heard the reaction of the family, but these jurors have sat through the whole inquest. They've actually listened to not only to the police officers but other witnesses or another witness who actually saw what happened. They've carefully considered all the evidence, and although it's almost counterintuitive for a jury to say, no, we don't believe Mark Duggan had a gun in his hand, or I think it was 9-1 believing that he didn't have a gun in his hand.
9-1, yes.
And yet they say it was a lawful killing. Now, that even to me, that sounds counterintuitive, but you know, they were the ones who sat through all the evidence. They actually listened to the officer who shot Mark Duggan, and they believed him when he said he thought Mark Duggan was about to shoot him. Now,
is it possible?
He was about to shoot him.
Sorry?
So he didn't actually point the gun at him then?
Well, as I say, I didn't sit through the...
Good morning, it's 1 minute past 9. I'm Nicky Campbell. It's your call. Your reaction to the Mark Duggan inquest. The jury concluded Mark Duggan was lawfully killed by firearm officers, but he was not holding a gun when he was shot. They unanimously thought he did have a gun prior to his being shot. The Met Police Commissioner, Sir Bernard Hogan-Howe, has welcomed the verdict and said his officers believed they were facing an armed criminal who posed a threat to them and the public. But the Duggan family are deeply upset. Their lawyer is Marcia Willis-Stewart.
The issue is an unarmed man was shot dead. This is the United Kingdom. We don't yet shoot unarmed people on the street. That's not what we do. That we still have a justice system that actually says when people do things, arrest them, charge them, put them through the courts.
Mark Duggan's aunt, Carol Duggan, says in her words her nephew was executed, but the former tactical advisor to the Met's firearms unit, Roger Gray, does not accept those words.
I can understand the passion, but they disgust me. I know what my former colleagues are like, and you know that terminology just simply does not apply. We're talking about a very last resort reaction here. The definition is when a man is armed or otherwise so dangerous, and this is what the officer believed, that he was armed or otherwise so dangerous and there was an imminent threat. That's why he reacted in the way he did.
What's your reaction? 0500 909 693 or on social media, BBC 5 Live. It's a reaction coming in. Your views on the it's not a verdict, it was a conclusion. Your reaction to the Mark Duggan inquest. Let's get a quick call now. Quick point. Nick and Stroud, what do you think?
Good morning, Nick. It seems to me that the police officers...
I'm saying these highly trained police officers, and we know, yes, it's dangerous out there, but they are highly trained police officers. That's the word, highly trained. They're not your normal Bobby on the street. You understand what I'm saying? So at the end of the day, if that's what highly trained officers do, well, you might as well give us back the bad ones, because at least we know what they do.
Brian Paddock.
Good morning.
What's your reaction to that? Highly trained officers.
Well, I think what people tend to forget is these are highly trained human beings. And these officers were faced with intelligence, which the jury said that it was absolutely impeccable intelligence, that they were dealing with armed criminals. And indeed, the jury concluded that Mark Duggan, immediately before he was shot, was in possession of a gun. And as Ian Blair said on Radio 4 this morning, these officers are faced with split-second decisions where, and it appears that the jury decided that this officer who shot Mark Duggan had a justified, honest belief that he was about to be shot. by Mark Duggan.
Okay, a justified honest belief. Thomas in Birmingham in the West Midlands. Hello, Thomas.
Good morning.
A justified honest belief that he was about to be shot.
I can't think how he possibly could have drawn that conclusion. I mean, my point for ringing is that I'm in agreement with the family. I think that Mark Duggan was, not to put too strong a point on it, he was murdered. And I think
without putting too...
On the day, they did a really good job. No one celebrates when a guy is killed, but there's a way of giving up your weapon and giving up safely. He didn't do that, and he unfortunately paid the price.
Okay, we'll come back to that point with others in a moment, but we've got this to listen to. Stay there, Nick. The former Deputy Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Sir Ian Blair, has told the Today programme that if the public understood the pressures that armed officers were under, and this really emphasises the point that you're making, Nick, people might be more sympathetic.
We need the public to understand what is happening. I mean, the best example of this was the dreadful murder of Lee Rigby, where the officers arriving, the firearms officers, were seen by the public to have to react in milliseconds to a life-threatening situation. And if we could get more people to understand that that's what happens, then maybe some of the heat, the desperate heat of these inquiries would dissipate.
Well, Clasford Sterling joins us, who is a community developer in Tottenham, works at Youth Sport and Community Activities, and Brian Paddock as well, formerly of the Met, former Deputy Assistant Commissioner. Clasford Sterling, good morning.
Good morning.
You can understand the heat, you can understand the anger. What's your view on the conclusion of the inquest?
Well, the community's outraged. I mean, it's quite obvious, and I understand what that caller just said. It's quite obvious if the evidence is put to you in that way, the police's way. You know, he was an unarmed man. They can't get away from it. There is this grey area of how the so-called gun was 20 foot away from the car. Well, I've never known Mark to be a discus thrower or a shot put thrower.
Did you know him?
And doing it from, yes, I knew him. And to do it out of the back of a car and it get all the way to where it got seems a bit far-fetched. The only two people who's going to actually know now is Mark and the police, and Mark's gone.
So you knew him. What about the headlines this morning? The man who lived by the gun, arms draped around two violent gangsters.
The community knows, and also the police knows that is an absolute load of rubbish.
What was he like?
You know, Mark, as his mum's often described him, weren't no angel. There's a load of no angels in the community, but he was not. Mark was not the notorious Mr. Big. There's many of that even in the government. So at the end of the day, you know, they have to now describe him to justify what they've done. He was an unarmed man. If that's how our highly trained police officers act, well, then I'm sorry if that's the sign of things to come.
Why did nobody on the jury, and this was a jury that, as David Lammy, the MP, said fairly reflected Londoners, why did nobody on the jury say this was an unlawful killing? 8 said it was a lawful killing, 2 said open conclusion, none said it was unlawful.
Yeah, why indeed? I mean, this has been the trend for many years with black people. So, you know what I mean? And also
but there were
maybe
black
in the
people,
larger community.
The indication from David Lammy is that there were black people on the jury. So
Well, listen, David Lammy is an MP. And at the end of the day, he has to be very tactful in how he puts things over. Now, at the end of the day, I'm not an MP. I'm a member of the community. I can say how I feel, and the community can say how they feel. Now, at the end of the day, he was an unarmed man.